It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, whom I've worked with for the past 8 years. Father Justin is a Jesuit priest and General Counsel to the Australian province. Born in New Zealand and having grown up in South Africa, Father Justin brings a wealth of international experience and perspective to his ministry. He is a civil lawyer who practiced in both New Zealand and South Africa before pursuing further studies in canon law in Canada, just for something added. In his multifaceted life journey, Father Justin has made significant contributions to the academic and spiritual communities. He lectures at the Melbourne College of Divinity, specifically at the Catholic Theological College, where he imparts his knowledge to students with a blend of practical and theoretical expertise. His work extends into the realm of disability, theology and praxis, drawing from his personal experience of being blind to advocate for greater inclusion and understanding within the church and society. Father Justin's dedication to service is further evidenced by his involvement with the Disability Advisory Committee of the Melbourne City Council. His commitment to the inclusion and well-being of individuals with disabilities has been recognised at the highest levels. In 2023, Pope Francis appointed him as a consultor to the Dicastery for Laity, Family and Life, reflecting his significant contributions to these important areas of church life. Moreover, Father Justin is an honorary fellow of the Australian Catholic University, where he continues to influence and inspire through his writing and teachings. Today, we are privileged to hear from a man whose life and work exemplify dedication, compassion, and intellectual rigour. On a personal note, I can honestly tell you that Father Justin is the smartest person I've ever met, and equally the most compassionate one. Two quick examples to highlight this. Last week, Father Justin and I had to meet with some Polish priests. When they joined us online, Father Justin greeted them in Polish. In my head, I'm thinking, of course he can speak Polish. And some of you might have noticed yesterday that after he had conversed with Laureen and Marianne, he signed thank you to them. Once again, in my head, of course he knows sign language. You couldn't find a more inclusive man and priest to share his thoughts with us about belonging. Please welcome Father Justin Glyn.
Well, I don't know if I can actually top that billing, but there we go. And if I'm speaking too fast, one of the interpreters is welcome to hit me. As this conference shows, our church has fortunately become more alive to the need for robust professional standards and the many ways in which relationships of trust and power can be abused. But as the canonical term vulnerable person suggests, disabled people, especially those with intellectual disability, as well as children, are currently regarded primarily as objects of care. This has been driven by an understandable desire to protect those who cannot uphold their own rights. Unfortunately, it does have the potential to exacerbate the power imbalance which we disabled people often experience in a church whose instincts are often already hierarchical, and where disabled people have only recently become recognized as members of the church rather than objects of its care. I'm going to suggest that that the problem with this model is that it doesn't recognize that all of us will or have been at some stage in our lives in need of protection from those in a position to exploit us. In the disability community, there is the term TAB, the temporarily able-bodied. None of us, whether we're adult or child, are an object of care, but each of us is rather a collaborator in the vineyard of the Lord to the limits of our capacities, one in and through whom God is present in the world. What's been missing from the discussion has therefore been an understanding of protective standards as universally applicable in a church where each of us is, as the author of the letter to the Hebrews put it, a firstborn child of God. Finally, I'll suggest some practical implications of the paradigm shift. So let's think about bringing the exiles home. As Francis famously commented, many people with disabilities feel that they exist without belonging and without participating. Much still prevents them from being fully enfranchised. This is from Fratelli Tutti. The need to bring home these exiles can be seen to stand in some tension with the need for protection, where they're unable to make or express decisions unaided, whether for reasons of physical or mental disability. So how do we reconcile the recognition of vulnerability with the need to see us as responsible laborers rather than objects of care? So being a canon law guru, and please everybody don't have your eyes glaze over mentioning canon law, because this is useful. There's a contradiction in the canon law as it stands at the moment, and this was mentioned on the first day. The new Book 6 of the Code of Canon Law, which deals with canonical offences, expands the delict of sexual offences against minors in Canon 1398 to a person who habitually has an imperfect use of reason with one to whom the law recognises equal protection. Now, it's clear that the intention here is to protect people due to some permanent mental incapacity, are recognized as being unable to act unassisted on their own behalf. And so we've got a long tradition stretching back to classical Roman law, way back to 450 before Christ and the 12 tables, which talks about representation of people who need it. In contrast, though, the updated motu proprio, vos estis lux mundi, defines a vulnerable person as follows. A vulnerable person means any person in a state of infirmity, physical or mental deficiency or deprivation of personal liberty, which in fact even occasionally limits their ability to understand or to want or to otherwise resist the offence. Now, such a contradiction in legislative provisions obviously causes difficulties in applying the law, but that's not what I'm going to dwell on today. Instead, I'd like to explore the definition in Vos Estis and suggest that it's one which is much more appropriate to a safeguarding context, as it allows disabled people to be protected without turning us into powerless wards of others. So, how do we go from incapacity to power imbalance? At first sight, the Vos Estis definition looks similar to the one in the Code, because it focuses on inability, as Sheila said, what we can't do. Indeed, while deficiency is a word laden with judgment, I can't think of that any of us with disabilities would call ourselves deficient. The terms infirmity and deprivation of personal liberty are a bit broader. Aside from youth or physical or mental impairment, many people might suffer from infirmity or deprivation of liberty for a variety of reasons, and not all of them are physical. So, for example, we could use such a term to talk about the recently widowed spouse, whose depression makes them more vulnerable to sexual exploitation. Or perhaps the immigrant whose liberty is restricted by lack of rights or knowledge of the host country's language. In addition, unlike the definition in the Code, the Vos Estis definition explicitly provides that the issue may be short-lived or occasional rather than permanent. So, in our examples, The widow might integrate her experiences and find her grief less incapacitating. Or the immigrant might learn the language, gain citizenship, and become more assured in their new country. Vos Estis itself notes what's at issue is determining whether one is vulnerable is one's ability to understand, to want, or to resist the offense. So in short, what it's trying to address is a power imbalance, a situation where for any number of reasons, the victim is less able to prevent the offense. So, for example, the question of power imbalance is central to many understandings of safeguarding. My own province of the Society of Jesus provides in the preamble to the Code of Conduct, which Simon did a lot of work on preparing, all people can be at risk at times and for various reasons. It is upon us all to be mindful of where power imbalances lie and that people can be at risk. A power imbalance is in turn defined as a situation where one person or group has a significant advantage over another that allows them to coerce or mistreat another for their own ends. Other codes of conduct in other areas have this as well in such diverse fields as medicine, the civil service, or youth work. Many, if not all, legal systems have institutions which discourage exploiting temporary or permanent vulnerability, whether that be by way of setting aside contracts under duress or fraud, or criminalizing such conduct. Canon law, of course, is no exception. The canonists in the audience will be well aware of such canons as 125 and canons 1090 and canon 1098, which talk about fraud in various circumstances. And the importance of reframing this in the context of disability as a power imbalance cannot be understated. And this is because it takes the question of safeguarding out of the realm of us protecting them. Neither safeguarding nor disability are matters which one group can decide for another. We are all baptized into one church, and so we're each obliged to protect each other to the best of our ability, to avoid exploiting each other, and to live as people of love, as brothers and sisters in Christ. Fratelli tutti, indeed, brothers and sisters all, as Francis, quoting a much older Francis, said. Accordingly, some of us will be in constant need of protection, others will not. Nevertheless, it's obvious that nobody can truly say that they will never be on the weaker end of a power relationship. All of us were children once, and many of us will get old. The limits imposed by disability and impairment will likewise create power imbalances in some areas, but not in others. When I am ministering as a priest or lawyer, for example, I am the powerful person in the relationship. By contrast, when somebody is picking me up off the floor after I've had an epileptic seizure, or when I need somebody else to transport me, because surprisingly, even in Australia, they don't allow, the insurance companies don't let people drive by braille, then I'm the one who's going to be in need of protection. We disabled people have known of these contradictions for a very long time. Mutual aid among disabled people was well established long before COVID-19 reared its spiky head, although it expanded hugely then, especially as most governments made it clear that we disabled people were well at the bottom of their priority lists. Those who could drive, for example, gave transport to those who couldn't. And many of those who were helped in this way could, for example, give other people research skills, food, and other help to get through. As those of us who submitted the document, "The Church is our home," to the consultation for the Synod on Synodality noted, the active presence of people with disabilities can help the Church overcome the efficiency-based and marginalizing mentality of today's society. It is what Pope Francis recently called a true magisterium of fragility. Seeing the fragility of one's brother or sister leads to reflecting on one's own and the fact that we all, some more, some less, need the help of others. Contact with fragility strengthens one's faith because it is precisely in weakness that God shows God's love and mercy. Our presence may help transform the actual situations in which we live, making them more human and more welcoming. Without vulnerability, without limits, without obstacles to overcome, there would be no true humanity. In particular, after the COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately took its toll on us with disabilities, the Church has much to learn from the mutual help that communities of people with disabilities have offered to one another. Once again, we're reminded that disability itself is a social phenomenon. What excludes people from society is not impairment as such, but it's society's denial of access to people with given impairments. It follows that the power imbalances which attend disability represent concrete decisions to exclude, or more realistically, not to include, whether it be by denying physical or sacramental access, or preventing people from gaining the assistance they need to make decisions. These may not be of the same order of exploitation as sexual abuse, but nevertheless they do legitimize disability as a ground of excluding people from society and a meaningful sense of belonging. Given that we as Church proclaim that our very identity as community is sacramental, we cannot afford to exclude any of our members. In short, the road to authentic safeguarding lies in belonging. While the older canonical model of disabled people as wards, objects of protection, certainly provides a measure of assistance and guard from sexual and other abuses, it assumes that we are foreign bodies, never really included in the Church into which we're baptized. By contrast, more effective protection lies in a model of safeguarding suggested by Vos Estis, which recognizes all of us as sisters and brothers, all both sometimes in need of protection and sometimes able to provide it. Such a model recognizes that there'll be times in areas where anyone's limits means that they're vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, but also that they too might be on the other side of a power imbalance. Indeed, such a model not only looks at the actual circumstances in which protection is required, and therefore allows that protection to be better tailored, but it also allows the acknowledgement of a broader reality of disability as a social phenomenon, which prevents those of us with impairments from being fully recognized as belonging to a church of us, not us and them. Many thanks.
And I forgot he speaks Italian as well, just to add to it. We're running very ahead of time, but I thought it might be a wonderful opportunity, though, to ask some general questions to the panel, if anyone has any, before we move to an early coffee, probably. Just grabbing some microphones quickly. Sister Jane's going to do a rundown. New Price is Right. Does every country have New Price is Right? No? Thank you.
Thank you all. And my question actually is for Father Justin, and I value your work very much, Justin. The magisterium of fragility, though, my concern about it is that by emphasizing we're all vulnerable, which we are, right? We're wired to need each other. But I think that the magisterium of fragility, it sort of sentimentalizes and it tries to homogenize the more precariously vulnerable or fragile because of being devalued by and unappreciated in social norms. And so that's my concern, is that it then doesn't keep attention on the tensions that we still need to address. I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
I think that's a very real concern, but I think that it also requires us to acknowledge that fragility comes in different shapes and sizes. We tend as a church to concentrate on the individual, which is good when we're talking about individual sin or individual relationship of God. But I think, and this is where I think your concern comes in, if I read it correctly, we tend also to forget that the church talks too, particularly in its social teaching, about structures of sin. And the structures which lead to precariousness, the structures which exclude, are also structures which exploit fragility of people. So I think the magisterium of fragility is helpful, but it does need to be construed in a broader and wider social as well as an individual context. So what is it that our societies, what are the fragilities that our societies create? Who are the excluded by the society? And God forbid, who are the people who have been excluded by the church? Where do our fragilities come from? Because you're right. They may be physical, they may be mental, they may be psychosocial, they may be all sorts of things. And if we take one set of fragilities and focus on them alone, then you're right, we're left with a kind of chocolate box of the individual, which takes us back to the very thing we're trying to avoid in the first place.
And also, and there's the individual, so there are the social structures that are also maintained within individual lives, too, because of those biases. Thank you.
Yes, I think they do come in various shapes and forms, agreed, and there are interactions between those.
Just a comment, observation. Thank you all very much. I'd like to propose that the church do a reprogramming, a reboot, if you will, because we still have very much a vertical church as opposed to horizontal. And what do I mean by that? For example, at Mass, it incenses me to no end when we get ready to begin and the cantor gets up and invites everyone to please join us in singing, well, why the separation? And instead, perhaps could we use language of together we stand and together we sing, our opening hymn. Just an observation. And that's, I think, programmed in general.
Well, I think that's a fair comment.
Any other questions?
Now, to my friend Father Justin and to the panelists, just a quick one. Most of you are into canon law and experience in pastoral ministry with people with disabilities. First one, in Kenya we have managed to train only one deaf man to be a catechist, serving the whole church in Nairobi and Kenya at the moment because of the institutional barriers that we have within the church structures. Now, my big question now, we have 2 deaf members who have expressed interest to join religious life and the diocese, but after approaching all the necessary structures, nobody is willing to take them in. Are there canonical impediments for people with disabilities to join religious life? That is the first thing, because I've tried to check through the canon law, but I can't seem to trace any. And secondly, because Sister, you are there, Sister Donatella, there are also 2 young deaf ladies who are willing to join religious congregations, but none of our religious nuns seems to be willing. Are there impediments for young deaf ladies to join religious life, and how can we sensitize the religious on the necessity of being inclusive to the point of having people with disabilities within the congregation if there are no canonical impediments? Thank you.
Well, I agree that there are no canonical impediments to people who are deaf joining either religious congregations or indeed to ordination. The American canonist Ed Peters some years ago wrote an article called "The Ordination of Men Bereft of Speech," saying that sign language as a grammatical language was perfectly acceptable as a means for expressing the vows, taking the vows given at ordination and the promises at ordination. And certainly in my own religious community, the Society of Jesus, we have deaf priests who are Jesuits. And in fact, also, I mean, there's a parallel too. If anybody's Canon 1105 specifically talks about marriage consent by sign language, and so I think that yes, there is a lot of institutional prejudice, but I think it's institutional prejudice rather than canonical impediment.
It isn't a question, but just a thought. In answer to that, my own master's thesis, when I was looking at belonging in the church, the one area I found a huge hole in was in the person who was called to religious life, to the priesthood, but had a disability. And on the table, the Kairos table, is my master's thesis, if anybody wants to have a look at it, that looks at the whole issue behind this. It was written a long time ago by somebody very dyslexic. But in the appendix, there is an exploration of the opportunities and barriers that exist in canon law for ordination of men called to the Catholic priesthood. So if you want to have a chat after, I'll be at the table, just if it helps. Thank you.
Just a funny story that I would add to that is, I mean, the prejudice is not only against deaf people. When I was applying to join the Jesuits, I had a vocation promotion guy who I don't think knew much about me or other people, so in some ways. So when it said on the form that I needed to have a medical assessment, I wrote in and I said, "Look, I'm legally blind. Is this a problem?" And he said, "Well, you might want to consider an order that's less intellectually demanding." I said, "Well, I'm finishing a PhD at the moment. Do you think that's still going to be a problem?" "Oh, all right."
questions? Yes.
I don't know if this is a comment or a question, but in some respects, I wonder if in the church we're almost uniquely unqualified to create some kind of a solution to the us versus them problem because of clericalism in the church and the notion, almost embedded in the institution, is the idea that if you are among the lay class, that you suffer from a disability. And that in many respects, among both the clergy and the laity, their clericalism, sometimes shared clericalism, is actually the disability that we need to address and will make us more qualified to address other types of us and them paradigms in the institution of the church itself. Any comments about that? And I realize that may be the subject of a whole other conference, but that's something that just occurred to me over the last day or two as we've been talking about some of these issues.
Looks like I've been handed the hot potato again. I agree that clericalism is an absolute issue. And I agree that, as you say, it's not only among the clergy, but among the laity. And I agree that if we don't do something about those sorts of divisions within ourselves, then, it's difficult to preach to others. But I also think that as a church, if we say that just as individuals, if we say that we don't, if we actually say that our sins preclude us from doing anything, that seems to me the sin of despair. We can't, just because we are obliged to hold ourselves up in the light of God, that doesn't actually prevent us from doing what we can in our own lives as well as others. Yes, we have to act in ourselves, otherwise we're hypocrites. But we ourselves are actually people of God given a mission, and our mission doesn't require us to be perfect first.
Anyone else?
Hi. So, sì.
It's coming.
I have a question for the Italian speakers. Can I speak Italian?
Sì.
No. Ok, grazie. Volevo chiedere, abbiamo visto i dati delle rilevazioni relativi al 2020 al 2022, ma cosa sappiamo invece dei dati relativi agli anni precedenti al 2020, degli abusi o presunti abusi avvenuti in Italia? Perché penso sia un fenomeno iniziato ben molto prima.
Rispondo altrettanto in italiano perché so di potermi valere dell'interprete.
Let me just. So the question was, we saw all of the work that's been done regarding abuse and safeguarding of minors with disabilities in Italy, but we didn't hear the percentage of, am I correct, the percentage of people in Italy who experience abuse. So we heard what was being done, but we didn't hear what the situation is. Is that correct? Before 2020, before you started. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I speak in Italian because my English is not as good as enough to speak about a difficult theme like this. Ok, allora, noi abbiamo iniziato a fare questa rilevazione dopo aver istituito i servizi diocesani e i centri di ascolto che hanno raccolto le segnalazioni di abusi sul territorio. Quindi
So we began to initiate the work. Ripeti di nuovo. quel pezzo.
Abbiamo iniziato a raccogliere i dati da quando abbiamo istituito proprio dal 2020 i servizi diocesani tutela minori e i centri di ascolto.
Okay. So they began to gather the information when they began to see that there was a need to be able to protect minors at the diocesan level.
Abbiamo lanciato adesso un nuovo studio pilota che coinvolgerà le diocesi e che prevede proprio la rilevazione degli abusi segnalati nelle diocesi negli ultimi 20 anni, dal 2001 al 2021.
So we've begun now a pilot project of research which begins to investigate into the diocese the abuse that has taken place before 20 and 2021 over the last 20 years.
La rilevazione che abbiamo posto in essere, come dicevo, è dal basso, perché abbiamo i dati che arrivano direttamente dalle nostre strutture sul territorio. Questo nuovo studio pilota in partenza invece coinvolgerà direttamente le diocesi.
So this study, the data is coming from each of the dioceses and it involves the people that are working within the field of disability themselves.
Per quanto riguarda lo studio pilota, si rivolgerà esclusivamente agli abusi commessi da chierici.
So this will focus totally on the abuse so far that has come from the clergy.
Mentre la rilevazione dal territorio raccoglie anche eventuali segnalazioni di abusi commessi da laici che operino nelle strutture ecclesiali.
So within the laity and in the territorial projects and questionnaires, there will be also an attention to signs of abuse that's happened within the laity as well. Lay people and church structures. Lay people and church structures. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And Sister Veronica wants to answer the question before. Pezzo la volta per la dislessia.
Sorry, my English is very basic. I good understand, but I little speak. In Italy, we have some small religious congregation which welcome blind, deaf, and intellectual disabled. It's very, very little step. Okay, it's blind. In Italy, we have the more priests is blind, deaf, 1, 2. But now is the start of the little congregation. It's welcome the intellectual disabled people. It's I agree with Justin Glyn. The problem, I think, in Italy and all the world is the prejudice in cognitive, religious, and community for welcome the disabled people. In Italy, the work is the cultural revolution, is the change point of view. The disabled people, it's not only object, but it's the resource. Ecco, is the normal people. It's in Italy, the slogan, it's project of life, it's vocation, okay? All people is possible vocation, ecco.
So Sister Veronica says, that was fantastic, but I'll just summarize it down. That in Italy there has been a movement within some religious orders, not just to include people who are blind or who are deaf, but also people with intellectual disabilities who can live their vocation, and that the cultural shift has been not just to inclusion, but seeing the project of life of the person, and that vocation is part of that. And so therefore there's been a deliberate attention given to working with religious orders to talk about belonging within it. Thank you.
Sister Veronica, that's wonderful to hear, and it would be wonderful to expand that voice to the United States. Because I know of one woman in particular with cerebral palsy who has a master's in theology, who very much feels a call to religious life, but has continually been rejected because of the fact that she has cerebral palsy.
So Anne did you understand that? She has an experience of a friend with cerebral palsy. Did you understand? Do you need me to translate? Yeah, and in all the years that she's been asking to live or to become a nun, she's been constantly refused. So the question is, what should she do? Is that the question, Anne?
Or bring your conversations to the United States.
Porti la conversazione ai Stati Uniti. Te l'ho detto in inglese. Cioè, quello che stai facendo qua devi venire a fare in America.
Thank you for invitation, yes.
Puoi andare anche a casa sua, ha detto.
Or if we could show our thanks to all the panel today. Thank you very much.